and a very warm welcome to another instalment of Jono's Graveyard Jaunts on a particularly cold day in January 2022. So we are here then at Gilrose Cemetery, which is on the outskirts of the city of Leicester, and we're here to visit one of Leicester's most famous supergroup sons. Now, people of a certain age will recognise the man himself, or if not the person in question, certainly the names of his fellow band members and the groups and supergroups he was associated with and indeed a part of. And we're talking about Ric Grech. Now, Ric Grech was instrumental in forming Blind Faith and Traffic, which in turn consisted of rock and roll royalty such as Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood and the late great Ginger Baker, who sadly died in 2019. Eric Clapton was referred to as a rock god by many people, and indeed was a friend and a contemporary of the late great Jimi Hendrix, and did himself present Jimmy with a guitar shortly before Jimmy's untimely death at the age of 27, where Jimmy went on to join and was indoctrinated into the infamous 27 Club. So whilst Ric himself was not actually born in Leicester, he will always be inextricably linked to the city. He was born to Ukrainian parents who in turn moved to Leicester when Ric was 5 years old. Ric himself was born in France on the 1st of November 1946 and spent his formative years here, and indeed when he retired from music he spent the remainder of his life in the city and is actually buried here at Gilrose Cemetery. So Ric attended Corpus Christi Roman Catholic School in the city, where he played the violin in the late 1950s in the school orchestra. He gravitated towards the guitar and became adept on the instrument very quickly, and he then went on to become a multi-instrumentalist, learning the guitar, violin, viola and bass. And throughout his musical life, Ric always had a penchant for keeping classical music throughout his compositions. And indeed, when Ric was in the family, he insisted on using electronic pickups on the violin, which was unheard of at the time, and he was therefore a pioneer and an innovator when it came to music. In 1965, with Charlie Whitney on the guitar and Jim King on the saxophone, Ric formed a local band called the Farinas, who subsequently changed their name to The Family, and they recorded 2 albums as The Family, Music in a Doll's House and Family Entertainment, of which Ric played the bass guitar, violin and cello on. Whilst Chapman and Whitney were the principal songwriters, Ric did write a few songs and also sang a few. Family Entertainment was released in 1969 and was their second album, and a major turning point for Gretch personally, who in addition to playing bass and violin, wrote 3 of the songs for the album. One of the tracks from the album, entitled Second Generation Woman, was released in November of 1968 and featured Gretch on lead vocals, and it also featured a very cheeky lyric about a woman who, quote unquote, looks good to handle from a personal angle. So, supergroup status then. In the the late 1960s, Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood formed the supergroup Blind Faith. Now, Gretch had gotten to know Winwood through their mutual association with Island Records. So Gretch was an obvious choice from Winwood's perspective to join the band. Gretch recorded on Blind Faith's eponymous album along with Clapton, Winwood and Ginger Baker, who's also a former Clapton bandmate of Cream. And Blind Faith remained the only band to have had #1s with their first album in both America and the UK jointly. The quartet also toured the US, but Clapton was disappointed with the quality of the music and the band disbanded. Now, Gretch and Winwood stayed with Ginger Baker to form Air Force, which was a supergroup that in turn included Danny Lane, who was ex-Moody Blues and would go on later to join Paul McCartney and Wings. And when the group ended, Winwood reformed Traffic with Baker, Capaldi and Gretch on bass. And the family, like Traffic, lasted only 2 albums, Welcome to the Canteen and the Load Spark of High Heel. Drugs and alcohol were always a constant throughout Gretch's life, and due to his often intoxicated state, his band members had to dismiss him after he only lasted 2 albums with Traffic. Now in 1973, Ric played on Eric Clapton's comeback tour at the Rainbow Theatre in North London, and he then joined the Crickets, who were Buddy Holly's former backing band. Ric was 28 years old now. Gretch remained firmly active with his music, undertaking lots and lots of session work with Rod Stewart, Ronnie Lane, Vivian Stanshall and Muddy Waters, and Ric also worked with the Bee Gees. In 1973, Gretch made 2 further attempts to form rock groups, which in turn failed. He then went on to form KGB in 1974 and subsequently Square Dance Machine, which was an attempt to form country music in the Gram Parsons style, but this failed due to the emergence of the punk rock movement of that year. Gretch eventually retired from music in 1977 at the age of 31 years. He then moved back to Leicester, where rumours had it that he actually became a carpet salesman, believe it or not. It is more likely though, however, that he lived off his royalty checks. On March 17th, 1990, Ric died from liver and renal failure at the Leicester General Hospital, brought on by brain hemorrhage. Due to years of alcohol addiction, he was only 43 years old. His grave has a great rock and roll epitaph on it. He who lives by excesses enters the palace of wisdom. And it's an extract from William Blake's poem, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So here we are, guys, at the final resting place of Leicester's very own Supergroup son, Ric Grech, who was born on the 1st of November in 1946 and died in March of 1990. And what we're going to do now, guys, is zoom in on the headstone and try and read the inscription on it. So we have Richard Roman Gretch, and it says died 16th of March 1990. It does actually say age 44 years, guys, but if you do the maths, he actually died when he was 43 years old. And there's that famous epitaph: he who lives by excesses enters the palace of wisdom. And what a great rock and roll epitaph. Thank you for the amazing music, Ric, and I hope you're resting in peace in between all your partying.